I stared at the vacuum cleaner sitting in the middle of my bridal shower, its bright red bow looking more like a mockery than a decoration. Around me, the elegantly decorated garden party, which I'd spent weeks planning, had fallen into an uncomfortable silence. Well, my stepmom Patricia smirked, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her champagne glass. Aren't you going to thank me, Emma? Every new wife needs to learn how to keep a proper house. The other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even my college friends, who didn't know the full history between Patricia and me, could sense the thinly veiled insult. The vacuum cleaner wasn't just a gift, it was a statement. A reminder of what Patricia thought about my place in the world. My best friend Sophie squeezed my hand under the table, but I couldn't look at her. I was too busy fighting back tears, trying to maintain the composure I practiced for 12 years, ever since Patricia married my father when I was 16. Thank you, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. It's very practical. Patricia's smile widened. Of course it is. We can't all marry rich doctors and spend our days writing little stories, can we? Some of us need to face reality. Another jab, this time at both my fiancé Michael's career as a pediatrician and my work as a children's book author. Never mind that my latest book was climbing the bestseller list, or that Michael and I had met volunteering at a children's hospital. To Patricia, I would always be the awkward teenager who preferred books to designer clothes, who chose writing over the business career she tried to push me into. Actually, my father's sister, Carol, spoke up from her seat near the garden roses. Emma's latest book just got nominated for. Oh look, Patricia interrupted, pulling out another wrapped package. I almost forgot. I got you some cleaning supplies to go with the vacuum. Can't have my stepdaughter embarrassing the family by not knowing how to properly maintain a home. I felt my cheeks burn. This was supposed to be my special day, celebrating my upcoming wedding to Michael. Instead, it had turned into yet another opportunity for Patricia to remind everyone that she didn't think I was good enough. Just then, an unfamiliar car pulled into the driveway of my father's sprawling estate. A woman in medical scrubs stepped out, clutching an envelope. I'm looking for Emma Harrison, she called out, walking toward our garden party. I'm Sandra. I was Aunt Martha's caregiver. I have something urgent for you. Great Aunt Martha, my heart clenched. She had passed away 3 weeks ago, just before I could show her my wedding dress. She'd been my mother's aunt, my last connection to the mom I'd lost to cancer when I was 12. Martha had been the one who encouraged my writing, who kept my mother's memory alive with stories and photographs. I'm Emma, I said, standing up, anything to escape Patricia's triumphant gaze. Sandra handed me an envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with wax. Martha was very specific. This was to be delivered to you at your bridal shower, not a moment before. She made me promise. Patricia scoffed. Really? We're interrupting the party for some old letter. But I was already breaking the seal, my hands trembling slightly as I unfolded the thick paper. Martha's elegant handwriting filled the page. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I'm no longer there to stand beside you at your bridal shower. But before you shed any tears for me, there's something you need to know about your mother's side of the family, something I've been keeping safe until you were ready. Your mother wasn't just Caroline Harrison, beloved teacher and devoted mom. She was Caroline Blackwood Harrison, last of the direct Blackwood line, and heir to not just a fortune, but a legacy of extraordinary women who refused to be diminished by anyone. In the oak chest in my study, the one with the silver key you always admired, you'll find everything you need to know. The key is taped to the back of this letter. And Emma, darling, once you open that chest, make sure your stepmother is present for what comes next. Some lessons about proper behavior are best taught by example. All my love, Aunt Martha. P.S. The blue envelope is for your father. The red one is for Patricia. Both must be opened in front of witnesses. My hands shook as I turned over the letter. Sure enough, a small silver key was taped to the back, along with 2 additional envelopes. Well, Patricia demanded. What was so important that we had to stop everything for it? I looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time that day. We need to go to Aunt Martha's house. Now. Absolutely not, Patricia snapped. This is your bridal shower, and we haven't even opened all the proper gifts yet. She gestured to the pile of cleaning supplies. Actually, Sandra spoke up. Mrs. Martha was very clear. If Emma doesn't go to the house immediately after receiving this letter, certain documents will be sent directly to the family lawyer tomorrow morning. Documents she said Mrs. Patricia wouldn't want made public. Patricia's face went pale. My father, who had been quietly reading his newspaper in the corner, finally looked up. "What documents?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, holding up the blue and red envelopes. "But there's a letter here for each of you, and Aunt Martha was very specific about them being opened in front of witnesses." Half an hour later, our entire bridal shower party had relocated to Aunt Martha's Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town. The house had stood empty since her passing, but Sandra used her key to let us in. The furniture was still covered with white sheets, giving the place a ghostly appearance. But I knew exactly where to go. I'd spent countless hours in Martha's study, listening to stories about my mother while admiring a mysterious oak chest that sat beneath the window. As our group filed into the study, I approached the chest with the silver key. Patricia hovered nearby, her earlier confidence replaced by obvious anxiety. "Before I open this," I said, turning to face the room, "I think we should read the other letters first." I handed the blue envelope to my father and the red one to Patricia. My father opened his first, clearing his throat. "Dear James, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it's finally time for you to learn the truth about your late wife's family. Caroline never wanted to use the Blackwood money or influence. She wanted to make her own way in the world. And she wanted Emma to grow up understanding the value of hard work and kindness. But now it's time for Emma to know her full inheritance, both material and spiritual. And it's time for you to remember the promise you made to Caroline about protecting her daughter's happiness. The documents in the chest will explain everything. With love and hope for your redemption, Martha." Patricia's hands trembled as she opened her red envelope. As she read, all the color drained from her face. "Read it aloud," Sandra instructed. Mrs. Martha was very specific about that. Patricia swallowed hard and began to read. "Dear Patricia, we've never met, but I've watched you for years. I've seen how you've treated my great niece. I've documented every cruel word, every manipulation, every attempt to diminish her spirit. Yes, those are the documents I mentioned. But I've also documented something else, something about your past that you've worked very hard to keep hidden. Something about a previous marriage and funds that disappeared from a joint account. Inside the chest, you'll find 2 sets of papers. One goes to the authorities if you ever tried to interfere with Emma's inheritance or happiness again. The other, well, let's just say it would make fascinating reading for your social circle. The choice of which set becomes public is now in Emma's hands. Consider this your lesson in proper behavior. Sincerely, Martha Blackwood." The room was so quiet you could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantel. With trembling hands, I inserted the silver key into the chest's lock. The lid creaked open, revealing stacks of documents, photographs, and a leather-bound journal. On top was a letter addressed to me in my mother's handwriting, dated just weeks before she died. As I began to read, tears filled my eyes. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, you've grown into the woman I always knew you would become. Strong enough to stand up for yourself, wise enough to understand the responsibility that comes with power, and kind enough to use it wisely. The Blackwood women have always been more than society expected them to be. We built libraries while others built ballrooms. We funded schools while others bought jewels. We wrote stories that changed lives while others wrote gossip that destroyed them. Everything in this chest, the property deeds, the investment portfolios, the family trusts, it's all yours now. Use it well, use it kindly, but never let anyone make you feel small again. All my love, Mom." I looked up to find Patricia staring at me, her face a mixture of fear and disbelief. My father had sunk into an armchair, looking stunned. Sophie was grinning from ear to ear. "Well," I said, pulling out a thick folder of legal documents, "shall we see what else Aunt Martha left for us to discover?" The next hour was filled with revelations that left everyone stunned. The oak chest contained not just legal documents, but a century of Blackwood family history that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my mother's side of the family. The Blackwood Foundation, I read aloud from one document, currently holds assets valued at. I stopped, double-checking the number. That can't be right. Sophie peered over my shoulder and gasped. Patricia, who had been trying to maintain her composure, craned her neck to see. "Oh, and Patricia," I continued, pulling out another folder. Aunt Martha left something specific for you. Bank records from 2010. Something about a mysterious withdrawal from your first husband's accounts. Patricia's perfectly maintained facade cracked. That's not what you want everyone to know about. I asked quietly, just like how you've treated me for the past 12 years isn't something you'd want them to know. My father finally spoke up. Emma, I had no idea about any of this. About how Patricia treated you, about your mother's family. Of course you didn't, I replied, my voice steady. You were too busy letting your new wife reshape our lives to notice what was happening to your daughter. Sandra, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. There's more, Miss Emma. Mrs. Martha left instructions about the house too. The house. I looked around the grand study with new eyes. This beautiful Victorian mansion, filled with books, art, and history, had been my sanctuary during the difficult years after my mother's death. Now I understood why Aunt Martha had always said I'd never have to give up my safe haven. The house is yours, Sandra confirmed, along with everything in it. Mrs. Martha changed her will 3 months ago, after her last conversation with Mrs. Patricia. I remembered that day. Patricia had come to check on Aunt Martha, supposedly out of concern. Instead, she'd spent an hour belittling my career choices and suggesting that Martha should do something useful with her estate, rather than waste it on Emma's foolish dreams. You knew, I said to Sandra. All this time, you knew what Aunt Martha was planning. Sandra smiled. She hired me not just as a caregiver, but as a witness. Every interaction, every cruel word, every attempt to manipulate the situation, I documented all of it. Professional training, you see. We're taught to keep detailed records. Patricia stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. James, surely you won't let this manipulation stand. My father looked at the vacuum cleaner, which someone had brought in from the garden party. It sat in a corner of the study, its red bow now looking less like a mockery and more like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in our family. Actually, he said slowly, I think I owe Emma an apology. Several apologies. He turned to Patricia. And I think you and I need to have a serious conversation about the past 12 years. The next few hours were a blur of discoveries. The Blackwood women, it turned out, had been quietly building an empire of philanthropy and education for generations. My mother hadn't rejected her inheritance. She had simply wanted me to learn values before I learned about wealth. There's something else, Sophie said, pulling out a leather portfolio from the chest. Emma, look at these. Inside were reviews and notes about every story I'd ever written, carefully collected by Aunt Martha. But mixed in with them were older papers, stories written by my mother when she was young, illustrations she'd drawn, dreams she'd had of writing children's books herself. Like mother, like daughter, Sandra said softly. Mrs. Martha always said the storytelling gift ran in the family. As the afternoon light began to fade, our guests gradually departed, leaving me with my father, a suspiciously quiet Patricia, and a lifetime of discoveries to process. The cleaning supplies, I said finally, looking at Patricia. Did you really think that was appropriate? She flinched. I was trying to. To what? Humiliate me? Remind me of my place. Well, let me tell you about my place. I stood up, feeling the strength of generations of Blackwood women behind me. My place is exactly where my mother and Aunt Martha knew it would be, writing stories that matter, loving a man who supports my dreams, and carrying on a legacy of making the world better. I picked up Martha's detailed records of Patricia's past indiscretions. I won't use these, not because you deserve mercy, but because I choose to be better than that. But from now on, things will be different. Patricia nodded quickly, her eyes fixed on the damning documents in my hands. James, she said, turning to my father, perhaps we should go home and discuss things. After they left, I sat in Aunt Martha's study, my study now surrounded by the evidence of a legacy I never knew I had. Sophie had stayed behind to help me start sorting through everything. So, she said, grinning, should we cancel the vacuum cleaner's invitation to the wedding? I laughed, really laughed, for the first time that day. Actually, I think I'll keep it. Put it in Martha's study as a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming exactly who you were meant to be. I picked up my mother's journal, running my fingers over her familiar handwriting. I wish they were here to see this. They are, Sophie said softly. In every story you write, in every child who finds hope in your books. They are there. And now you know where you got your strength from. As night fell over the Victorian mansion, I started making plans. The Blackwood Foundation needed a new director. The house needed some restoration. And I had a wedding to plan. One that would honor not just my future, but my heritage. And somewhere, I like to think, Aunt Martha and my mother were watching, sharing a satisfied smile as their carefully laid plans finally came together. The following weeks brought changes that even Aunt Martha might not have anticipated. The Victorian mansion, which had always felt like a sanctuary, was gradually transformed into a combination of my home office and a creative writing center for underprivileged children, something I knew both my mother and Martha would have loved. One morning, as I was sorting through more of the chest's contents in my study, Michael stopped by with coffee and news. "You'll never believe who I ran into at the hospital," he said, settling into one of the antique leather chairs. "Patricia." I looked up from a stack of Blackwood family photographs. What was she doing there? Apparently, she signed up to volunteer in the pediatric ward. He smiled wryly. She looked different. Humbled. "Maybe?" "She asked me to tell you she started therapy." I absorbed this information while studying a photo of my mother at my age, standing in this very room. "Did you know," I said, changing the subject, "that this house was originally bought by my great-great-grandmother, Catherine Blackwood? She purchased it with money she made from writing mystery novels under a male pseudonym." Michael moved to look at the photo with me. Like mother, like daughter, like great-great-grandmother. "The Blackwood women have always been storytellers," I smiled. "But we've also been builders. Look at this." I showed him plans I'd drawn up for the writing center. The grand parlor would become a children's library, the sunroom a workshop space for young writers. The garden would host reading circles in summer. "This is amazing," Michael said. "But what about your father? Have you heard from him?" I nodded slowly. "He came by yesterday. We had a long talk, the kind we should have had years ago. He's filed for divorce." The door chimed and Sophie walked in, carrying more boxes from Martha's storage. "You'll never guess what I found," she announced. "Martha's wedding planning notebook from when your mother got married. And there's a letter for you inside." The letter was written in Martha's familiar hand. "Dearest Emma, if you're reading this while planning your own wedding, remember that a Blackwood wedding isn't about impressing others. It's about celebrating love, family, and the power of stories. Your mother wore wildflowers in her hair and read poetry during her vows. She danced with your father under the stars and promised to always keep magic alive in their home. In the attic, you'll find her wedding dress. She made me promise to keep it for you, along with her collection of children's books and her unfinished stories. She knew, somehow, that you would complete them in your own way. Love always, Martha." That afternoon, Sophie and I climbed to the attic. There, in a carefully preserved trunk, we found my mother's wedding dress. Simple, elegant, with tiny books and flowers embroidered along the hem. "It's perfect," Sophie whispered. And it was. Not just the dress, but everything it represented. The legacy of women who wrote their own stories, who built foundations of knowledge and kindness, who understood that true wealth wasn't in bank accounts, but in the lives you touched. Over the next few days, wedding plans shifted. Instead of the elaborate hotel reception Patricia had pushed for, we decided to hold everything at the Victorian mansion. The ceremony would be in the garden where my mother had once read stories to me. The reception would be in the rooms that would soon help new generations of writers find their voices. One evening, as I was working late in the study, there was a knock at the door. It was Patricia, looking uncharacteristically unsure of herself. "I found these," she said, holding out a box. "In the back of your father's closet. I think they belong here." Inside were my mother's notebooks, filled with story ideas and sketches. Patricia had hidden them away years ago, trying to erase the past she felt threatened by. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I was wrong," she replied, not meeting my highs. "About so many things. I thought being powerful meant making others feel small. Your aunt's letters, they made me see what real strength looks like." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Patricia, the Writing Center is holding an open house next month. You're welcome to come." She nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing her face. The day before my wedding, I sat in Martha's study, my study, surrounded by 3 generations of Blackwood women's books, papers, and dreams. My mother's wedding dress hung by the window, catching the late afternoon light. On the desk lay my latest children's book, dedicated to the women who taught me that every life is a story worth telling. And in the corner stood a vacuum cleaner with a red bow, transformed from a symbol of humiliation into a reminder that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as challenges. Ready for tomorrow? Sophie asked, bringing in a final box of wedding decorations. I looked around at the room that had witnessed so much: pain and healing, endings and beginnings, small cruelties and great kindnesses. Through the window, I could see children already gathering for tomorrow's garden ceremony, peeking curiously at the books and writing supplies set up for them. You know what? I smiled. I think I've been ready for this my whole life. I just needed to find my story. And somewhere, in whatever library heaven surely has, I like to think Aunt Martha was sharing that story with my mother, both of them knowing that their legacy lived on in ways no vacuum cleaner could ever diminish. My wedding day dawned bright and clear, the Victorian mansion's gardens bursting with wildflowers, just as they had been for my mother's wedding. The cleaning supplies Patricia had given me at the bridal shower had been transformed into a creative display in the children's writing corner, each item labeled with prompts like, "If this mop could talk," and "The magic vacuum's greatest adventure." As I dressed in my mother's gown, Sophie helped me pin fresh flowers in my hair. The tiny embroidered books along the hem seemed to shimmer in the morning light. "Look what I found in the dress pocket," Sophie said, pulling out a folded piece of paper. It was another note from my mother. "My dearest Emma, if you're wearing this dress today, it means you've grown into the woman I always dreamed you'd be. Remember, the greatest love stories aren't just about romance. They are about becoming who you were meant to be, about finding your voice and using it to make the world a little better. Love, Mom." A knock at the door revealed Sandra, Aunt Martha's former caregiver, who had become an unexpected friend through all of this. "The children are here," she announced, all 20 of them from the hospital's long-term care ward. This had been my special addition to the wedding, inviting young patients from Michael's pediatric ward, many of whom had been the first to read my stories. They sat in the garden now, each holding a book and wearing tiny flower crowns. My father appeared at the door, looking both proud and slightly ashamed. "Emma, before we go down, I want you to have this." He handed me a small package. Inside was a charm bracelet. "It was your mother's," he explained. "She used to add a charm for every story she wrote. I should have given it to you years ago, but Patricia—" "I know," I said softly. "But we're writing a new story now, aren't we?" The ceremony was everything I dreamed of, and nothing like Patricia would have planned. Michael waited for me under an arch of books and flowers. The children from the hospital formed an honor guard, holding up their favorite stories as I walked past. Instead of traditional readings, we had storytelling. I read a passage from my mother's unfinished work, while Michael shared the story of how we met, him reading my books to his patients, not knowing the author was the same woman who kept bringing donated books to the ward. But the real surprise came during the reception. Patricia approached the microphone during the open sharing time, looking nervous but determined. "I've spent years trying to shape stories that weren't mine to tell," she said. "But Emma and her family's legacy have taught me that the best stories are the ones that make room for everyone else's voice too." She turned to me. "I've made an anonymous donation to the Writing Center. Every child who comes here will receive their own journal and a chance to tell their story." Later, as Michael and I danced under the stars, just as my parents once had, I caught glimpses of the future we were building. Children sprawled on picnic blankets in the garden, writing their first stories. My father sitting with a young patient, learning to listen. Even Patricia tentatively joining a group of kids who were creating a collaborative tale about a magical vacuum cleaner. Sophie appeared with one final surprise, a leather-bound book filled with blank pages. "From all of us," she said, "for the next generation of Blackwood stories." On the first page, Aunt Martha had written one last note. "Dear Emma, a vacuum cleaner can only clean what's on the surface, but stories? They clean the dust from our hearts, sweep away the cobwebs of fear, and polish the windows through which we see the world. Your mother understood this. Now you do too. Write on, my dear. Write on. Love, Martha." As the evening drew to a close, Michael and I stood in the study, our study now surrounded by books, dreams, and possibilities. The vacuum cleaner still stood in its corner, its red bow now accompanied by dozens of sticky notes bearing children's stories about its secret adventures. Ready to start our own story? Michael asked, holding me close. I looked around at the room that had witnessed so much transformation, at the children still writing their tales in the garden, at my father teaching a young patient how to craft a proper once upon a time, at Patricia finally learning that true power lies in lifting others up. You know what? I smiled. I think our story has already begun, and it's going to be more magical than any of us imagined. That night, as our guests departed with books and journals as wedding favors, I added a new charm to my mother's bracelet, a tiny silver pen. Not just for the stories I'd written, but for all the stories yet to come, because that's what the Blackwood women had always understood, that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a challenge, that the best revenge is living well, and that even a vacuum cleaner can become part of a story about transformation and grace. And as Michael and I drove away from the Victorian mansion, now lit up with fairy lights and echoing with children's laughter, I knew this wasn't just a happy ending. It was a beautiful beginning.